Good morning, warriors. Welcome to the Morning Adrenaline. Today is Monday, January 19th, 2026. It is time to wake up the warrior. Today, we start with a simple truth about the world that we live in. I have a news flash for you. It's dangerous out there. And anyone paying attention knows that. There are real threats outside of your control, and that's key. And they deserve to be taken seriously. You have violence in the streets, random attacks that make no sense, wars playing out in real time, natural disasters wiping out entire communities almost overnight, economic pressure crushing families quietly. There are real and dangerous threats. Serious people don't deny them. You prepare for them the best that you can. You stay alert, you adapt, and that makes total sense. But something doesn't add up when you look at most people's lives. People take external danger very seriously. You lock doors, you buy insurance, you carry protection, you plan exits, and you talk about what it takes to stay safe with your loved ones. Because danger is obvious when it looks like chaos. But here's the strange part. Most people don't lose their lives to sudden catastrophe. They survive that danger and still find a more serious danger lurking. So this is what it looks like. You manage to stay alive, you remain functional, and you stay busy. But you don't rise. So what is this serious threat that most people are still oblivious to its existence? The most dangerous threat to your life is not out there. The most dangerous threat to you is you. Not the reckless version, not even the self-destructive one, the comfortable one. The version that says, I'm okay. This is fine. I'll push later. I don't need to change right now. That version doesn't attack you, it disarms you. And in a minute, I'm going to show you the 5 warning signs that tell you this version is already terrorizing your life. And I'm going to show you at the end how to break that pattern before it becomes permanent for you. So before we go any further, you need to answer the question of the day, and you need to answer it honestly. What part of your life are you tolerating because it's not bad enough to force change? Don't rush past that. That answer matters. So let's break down the 5 warning signs before this becomes a permanent pattern for you. And the first sign is when comfort starts calling itself peace. See, peace comes from security. Comfort comes from avoidance. And here's where people get really confused. Sometimes you don't choose comfort because you're weak. You choose it because you're tired. You've been under pressure. You've been carrying heavy weight. You've been fighting through life situations. So you tell yourself you need peace, and you settle into comfort naturally. It starts subtly. You stop pushing as hard. You stop sharpening edges. You stop expecting more. You let down your guard, not because you quit, but because you want a mental break and a little bit of relief. And if you're not careful, what begins as rest turns into retreat. What feels like peace slowly becomes sedation. Comfort starts to whisper, don't disrupt things. Don't push too hard. Don't expect more. See, that doesn't end in calm. It ends in catastrophe until that pattern is actually broken, if it's ever broken. See, peace doesn't come from quiet alone. It comes from security, typically grounded in a personal version of freedom. Regardless how quiet your surroundings, you can't have peace if your life is still rooted in chaos. That could be financial. It could be a relationship or relationships that are on fire. It could feel like spiritual darkness. It could be poor health and fitness. So another way to say it is security doesn't come from stillness. It comes from knowing you're living in a way you can tank your personal brand or bank your personal brand on. So how do you break the pattern? Well, stop asking, am I stable? And start asking, am I solid? Growth creates security. Avoidance creates numbness. Comfort keeps you calm. Security keeps you standing. The second is when your days are full, but your life feels light. You're busy, your calendar is packed, but nothing feels heavy with purpose. So let me ask you something. Have you ever gone through an entire day moving nonstop, checking boxes, answering messages, making the phone calls, and at the end of it, you realize you actually accomplished very little? Now, here's the dangerous part. Have you ever stacked those days? And have those days ever turned into weeks, and those weeks turned into months, and possibly those months turned into years? And suddenly, you're not behind because of one bad decision. You're behind because of 1,000 busy ones. That's motion without movement. You're doing a lot, but you're not going anywhere. Busyness is how mediocrity hides in plain sight. See, I see this all the time in soccer. I see it with my own kids, and I see it with the kids that I coach. There are players, have you ever seen players, especially this happens a lot at the younger levels. My kids are 8 and 10. They both play soccer. And so kids love to work on their footwork. Lots of fancy footwork, lots of movement, lots of motion. Let me back up. Let's start there. Lots of motion. They're constantly moving around. They're creating motion. They're doing step overs. They're doing fakes. A few extra touches in there. It looks really impressive. But they never actually explode into space. They don't take the next decisive move forward. So all that motion is just noise if it doesn't create separation. Real progress in soccer isn't about how much you move. It's about whether your movement creates advantage. The same works for life. You can't stay busy every day and still never move closer to who you're supposed to become. So how do you break that pattern? You audit your days. Ask yourself one simple question. Does this reinforce discipline? What I'm doing right now, does it reinforce discipline, responsibility, or purpose? If it doesn't, I have really bad news for you. It's just noise. Less motion, more direction. A full schedule doesn't mean a meaningful life. And this leads directly into the next warning sign. Because when your days are full, but direction is missing, you start avoiding the one thing that would expose it, which is stillness. And that's the third sign. So the third sign is when you can't sit still enough to hear the truth. So your days are full, your life lacks direction, stillness becomes dangerous because stillness exposes what busyness has been hiding. Stillness tells the truth. So most people avoid it. They fill every gap with sound, screens, any type of stimulation they can find around them. Not because you're lazy, not because you already know what the silence is going to say. See, you don't want to hear you're off course, especially if you're telling it to yourself. You don't want to tell yourself you're off course, that you're settling, that you're capable of more, and you certainly don't want somebody else to tell you. Now, let's be clear about something. Nothing we've talked about to this point in previous comments that I've made in previous points means you don't need quiet. You do. You need moments of silence to learn, to self-assess, to evaluate, to meditate, to calm your mind, to recharge, to regain focus and clarity. See, sometimes you need isolation to find yourself again. That kind of quiet is healthy. That kind of stillness is necessary because there's a difference between intentional stillness and complacency. One leads to clarity, the other leads to avoidance. And most people aren't avoiding outside noise, they're avoiding themselves. Wherever you go, you're still there. So here's the hard truth. If you never slow down, you never have to self-reflect. And if you never self-reflect, you never have to change. That's why distraction is so dangerous. It keeps you moving just enough to avoid leadership in your own life. So how do you break that pattern? Build in a daily silence program. No input, no scrolling, no noise, just pure awareness. Now, a morning routine, by the way, that involves breathing, journaling, reading, possibly prayer, works wonders for this. Just a normal 15 to 30-minute routine right when you wake up in the morning usually gives you exactly what you need. Your soul doesn't speak to confuse you. It speaks to self-correct and empower your mind and your body. See, correction isn't condemnation, it's direction. If you can't sit still in moments where it's needed, you can't lead yourself. And here's where this all leads. Once stillness shows you the truth, you're left with a choice. You either raise your capacity to meet it, or you lower the standards so you don't have to. And that is the fourth sign, sign number 4. When you lower your standards instead of raising your capacity. Instead of becoming stronger, you become more understanding with yourself. You call it maturity. You call it grace. You call it being realistic. But most of the time, it's simple retreat. You don't need softer expectations. You need stronger structure. See, I love coaching kids and I love parenting because it teaches me more about adults than almost anything else. See, one thing I say all the time is you have to give kids credit for their capacity. This means you coach them up. You don't coach them down. I'll push my second graders like they're high schoolers, not because I'm harsh, but because I know what they're capable of. And you know what always happens? They rise, they respond, they grow, and they always come back for another season. They come back wanting more. Why? Because people by nature, kids or adults, don't want comfort. They want competence. But here's the truth. If you let them slack, they absolutely will. I see coaches do it all the time. I see parents do it all the time. And it's not just kids. Again, it's human nature. Now, let me be very precise here because this matters. Most adults didn't minimize themselves on purpose. They were conditioned by culture, conditioned by media, conditioned by systems that benefit you when you expect less of yourself, conditions that corrupt leadership, talks down to you instead of calling you up. See, you've been trained to believe you're fragile, that responsibility is dangerous, that expectations are unfair, that someone else should manage outcomes for you. And if you hear that long enough, you eventually live down to it. And it's not because you're weak. I want you to understand that. It's because repetition rewires your perception. So let me ask the question the right way. Are you more capable than a second grader? And the answer is, of course you are. You have more life experiences, more cognitive ability, more emotional range, more capacity. But here is the problem. You've been treated like you're less capable, and people eventually live into the standards placed upon them. Kids rise when you coach them up. Adults shrink when they're handled with kid gloves. And when you accept that treatment long enough, you don't just lose discipline, you lose identity. See, allowing yourself as an adult to continue living under child level expectations might be the most dangerous thing you could ever do to yourself. Because once standards are lowered externally, they eventually get lowered internally. And that's when retreat starts calling itself maturity. So, how do you break this pattern? Raise your standards and support them with discipline. Stop looking at discipline as punishment. It's self-respect in action. It's saying, I know I'm capable of, and I refuse to live beneath that. Lowered standards might feel kind, but they cost you everything. And this leads into the next sign. When you stop raising capacity and start lowering your standards, you need an explanation, someone to blame, something external to point to. And that's how people slide into the fifth sign, when blaming others feels safer than taking ownership. The fifth sign comes naturally after the fourth, when blame replaces accountability. And again, this matters. Once you lower your standards instead of raising capacity, failure is the natural outcome. And when failure shows up, blame is the next logical step for the weak-minded. Because ownership would require admitting that I compromised, I settled, I didn't do the work. So instead, people look outward. See, this fifth sign is when blaming others feels safer than taking ownership. There's something seductive about having someone else to blame. Systems, culture, history, injustice, other people's decisions. Blame gives you an explanation without demanding responsibility. And a lot of people like hiding behind concern. They worry about social justice, future outcomes, and imagined threats, while ignoring the work they need to do every day to improve themselves. They fear things before they happen, and they call it awareness. Do you know people like this? They fear things that literally have never happened and probably never will happen. And that's not awareness. That is displacement. It's moving attention away from personal failure so you don't have to confront it. And so let me ask you something. Be honest. Have you noticed we live in a victimhood culture like no other in our lifetimes? Where being oppressed carries more social value than being disciplined, where responsibility is framed as cruelty and expectations are framed as injustice. I know successful people, high profile, wealthy, influential people who want you to believe that they are oppressed. You know the names, you watch them, whether you've identified what they're doing or not is a whole different thing. Pay attention. I also know some of these personally, some of these people. that are very successful, and they try to convince others that they're oppressed because of simple things like skin color. They're amazingly successful. When I ask them, hey, what's the story? Tell me the backstory of this. Why are you oppressed? There's no story. They can't give it to me. It's ingrained in their head because people keep telling them that. They're talking down to them and they're buying into it. Victimhood has become currency because it removes accountability while preserving moral superiority. Now, I want to be actually really clear on something right here. And I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I'm not saying everybody starts life equally. That is absolutely not true. And that is not what I'm saying. People are born into different circumstances. Some have different advantages, others have different obstacles. But here's what I am saying. You're grown. And once responsibility is in your hands, your current situation is always the result of your choices. That doesn't mean that life is fair. It means ownership is still required of you. Look at the people who actually build something. Most of the successful people that I follow, wealthy, disciplined people I know that built something from the ground up, they didn't start with inheritance. They didn't start with privilege. They started with nothing. Take Grant Cardone as an example. He didn't start wealthy. He didn't start connected. He grew up around addiction, lost his father at a young age, hit rock bottom himself, no safety net, no guarantees. What changed his life wasn't blaming the system. It was the standards that he built, the relentless work, the personal accountability, the capacity building in himself and those around him as he built an empire. He bootstrapped businesses. He worked while others complained. He took responsibility when it would have been very easy to collect excuses. And here's the part that most people don't talk about. He didn't make it at a young age. He didn't build an empire in his 20s from an inheritance. His real momentum came later in life, after failure, after addiction, after setbacks. That would have given most people a permanent excuse to fail their entire life and pass it down from generation to generation. And again, that matters because it destroys one of the most dangerous lies people tell themselves. I'm behind. I missed my window. It's too late now. No, it's not too late. It's only too late if you refuse responsibility. The clock itself doesn't defeat people. Comfort does. Age doesn't stop growth. Lowered standards do. So how do you break this pattern? Bring everything back to the place that you control. Remember we said earlier, a lot of those dangers are out of your control. Bring it all back to what you can control, yourself. You could care about the world without outsourcing responsibility for your own life. You can acknowledge injustice without surrendering personal agency, personal autonomy, personal control. Concern without action is just distraction. Blame feels righteous. Responsibility builds your power. Now, here's the part most people miss without breaking patterns. Seeing the pattern itself isn't enough. Trying harder isn't enough. Motivation isn't enough because these patterns aren't conscious. These patterns aren't conscious. They live in the subconscious. They live in identity. They live in who you believe you are allowed to be. That's why people relapse. That's why discipline fades. That's why momentum collapses. Your identity corrects your behavior every single time. If you see yourself as a victim, your actions will protect that identity. If you see yourself as responsible, your behavior will rise to meet it. That's not ideology. That's human nature. So breaking the pattern requires an identity shift, not more willpower. At this point, this should be really clear. Seeing the pattern isn't enough. Trying harder isn't enough. Motivation isn't enough, because willpower is temporary and patterns are permanent unless identity changes. These patterns don't live in your calendar. They don't live on your to-do list. They live in your subconscious. They live in your identity. They live in what you believe you're allowed to expect from yourself. That's why people relapse. That's why discipline fades. That's why momentum collapses right when things start to work. Your identity always corrects your behavior. So if you want permanent change, you need a system that works below the surface. And I'm not talking about inspiration, pressure, or hype. I'm talking about an actual mechanism. And that's where Vita and our mind-shifting roadmaps come into play. This isn't motivation. It's not a shortcut. It's identity engineering. We have roadmaps designed to remove internal resistance, rewrite your subconscious identity patterns, make disciplined action automatic. See, when identity shifts, discipline stops feeling forced. Consistency stops being a fight. Action stops requiring negotiation. You don't try to live differently. You just are different when you rewire. And that's the only real way to break that pattern from the inside out. You don't break patterns with effort. You replace your identity. So listen, let's close this the only honest way I know how. The most dangerous version of you isn't failing, it's settling. It doesn't destroy your life overnight. It slowly negotiates it downward until you forget who you were meant to become. You don't need more motivation. You don't need another push. You need identity alignment. You need to get back in alignment with your true self, your God-given identity that was assigned to you at birth. So here's the question now that you can't dodge. What standards do you need to raise today if you're serious about becoming who you say you want to become? Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient, but right now, today. Because the moment identity is restored, discipline follows, clarity returns, and momentum becomes inevitable. Stop negotiating with comfort. Stop blaming the world. Stop waiting for permission. Start building who you are. Work your body, feed your mind, build your soul. Wake up the warrior. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Stuck in your mind.